Hi, everybody. I just wanted to take a moment and kind of give you a quick um, recording of this. I know that I've been absent last week. Part of that was just because it was just pretty hectic. We had my father-in-law come stay with us, and then we had a few events happen, and all of that just kind of like took all of the time that I had just managing little things here and there. It was never anything like a big project or anything like that. It was just 100 little things that every 10 minutes, like I would sit down and I had to get up and take care of it. So I finally was able to get a break and get more of a normal schedule right now. So I wanted to at least give an update of what's going on. As you can see right in front of you, you'll see that I have the summer schedule. And if you can think here, right, summer session one classes end on June 26th. Uh, Grades are due by July 3rd. So I have until July 3rd to submit your grade, which means that I can probably give you until about June 30th to give you an idea of when that is. If we put the calendar up, right? So the 26th is on Friday, 30th is on Tuesday. That's the latest I can give you to submit all the work that you have to submit. Um, Unfortunately, it's just one of those things where I have to submit grades, so you have to get this stuff done. If you have a problem, any problem whatsoever, um, just let me know. I have no problems kind of uh, working with you in one way or another and having a discussion with you about uh, if you need assistance with anything. All you need to do is just let me know. Okay, I just want to make sure that um, you guys are aware of um, what is it that has to be done. Really quickly, I want to give you kind of again that you guys don't see all of that. Let me just change this to the student view. So you can see I have a lot of stuff. So this is what you guys have. Right now at this point, um, you should be down to the social stratification part and working your way through race and ethnicity and gender. There's a lot of stuff there. It's kind of heavy, a lot of videos. Um, I wanted to make sure that you guys got a good understanding of how these things were. I think obviously with the race part and the social inequality, I think that that has been highlighted and it's so much in the news. I want to make sure, you know, I teach a race and ethnicity class, and in that class I go into so much more detail, and it's such an important, these topics, for me, they're extremely important. They're the areas that I tend to cover. This notion of social, racial, gender inequality are extremely important to understand. They highlight a lot of the tensions that exist within our society. Um, Remember that um, one of the things that the values that exist within our society is this notion of meritocracy, right? Basically, that as long as you're capable, you should be able to, accomplish whatever you can. Of course, there are limitations on that. We all understand that. This is not like, you know, uh, Pollyannish world where we're all, oh, if you work hard enough, you could become, the doctor that you want to be. It isn't quite like that because what if we don't need any more doctors? What if, other things come into play? What if there's so many things that could happen that could create limitations or, that are outside of a person's merit, right? So meritocracy in and of itself is not something that, is something that we value. Again, you remember back to talking about values. It's something that you value, but it isn't necessarily something that you have to like, you must have. But the notion of meritocracy, right, including the notion of equality, those two things, those two values are extremely important. And when we see in our society that people are, opportunities are taken away from them, in some cases it could be their life. In other cases, it could just be, economic opportunity. It could be schooling opportunity. One of the most difficult things to deal with in our country is this notion of, for example, schooling. All public schools are are funded not just by federal grant money, not just by state money, which provide, typical funding generally the similar funding across different districts. Um, but a big bulk of the um, funding that comes into the district comes from real estate taxes. Parents, very, very, and people who go off and go into the housing market buy homes based on the school district, right? And they're willing to pay a premium in some cases for the school district. And the school district is a good school district because those housing values, those homes are able to fund those school districts. They supplement those school districts um, um, very generously. What that means is that in some places where you probably could use more funds, there's less funds in those areas because the people who live in those areas can't afford to move their kids into other areas. So, this is important because the housing part can be significant. It can be about how you go into having um, an opportunity to go to a school district that is going to take your full potential and provide you with the opportunity to become the fullest individual that you can become. But if the resources are not there, then you run into the problem where you're not going to become the person who you should become if your district doesn't have that. And so we find that over the years, due to different ways in which society has split things up, whether it's through gender, whether it's through race, whether it's through class. Um, Sometimes it's more than in others. Sometimes you see class playing a role. For example, in one school district, you can have one school serving the poorest people in that school, and yet somehow that school tends to be less funded than, the other school. Typically, sometimes, yeah, in some towns, in some cities, just literally right across the street from each other, but one is designated for the neighborhood, on that side, on the east side. The other one is designated for the neighborhood on the west side, and it just so happens that the neighborhood on the east side is better, and that school gets a little bit more funding. That school also would have, and this is another way in which this happens, right? It would have parents who can be more engaged because their jobs allow them to, especially if they're middle class jobs with opportunities to get sick days and days off and personal days negotiated usually through fringe benefits, as opposed to the people who might live on the west side who maybe work uh, hour to hour, and therefore they will not be able to take time off. Any time off they take will cost them, money that they need in order to, allow for their families to survive in many cases. So this is one of those situations where you can have, you know, this condition where inequality manifests itself in the same school district because two different schools are can afford two different things, right? It's So it could be by class, it could be by race. Racial segregation has played a significant role in determining where people live, particularly if you're a person of color. And so not just class, which has also been that, but race specifically. So even if you are a wealthy, you know, person of color, you're going to find that there were restrictions as to where you could live. And this lasted all the way through the 1970s. And even recently, you find that there were restrictions being put in place. Sometimes it would be neighborhoods that would, you know, uh, create barriers for people from moving in. I know neighborhoods where, for example, the people who owned houses in those neighborhoods would not um, put their houses up for sale through a regular agency. Instead, they would sell through word of mouth. Or if they were renting space, they wouldn't put their advertising for their rental space on the newspaper. What they would do is they would do it word of mouth so that, oh, do you know someone who's looking for a space? I have a room available or I have a house available. And that way you only get certain kind of people, and I'm using air quotes here, coming into this house, right? It just so happens that in most cases that meant that you would get typically people who were just like you. And in many of these neighborhoods, these were, traditionally white people. And so you have this kind of circumstance where, you know, segregation created a lot of inequality. I'm just talking about one system, right? When we talk about systemic racism, when we talk about, in this case, there is systemic classism. We don't talk about that as much, but it's there. There is a gender uh, system that looks at women and treats women differently, and these systems are in place. Sometimes we see class and gender as more natural than race, although nothing truly is that natural. Yet these systems are in place that perpetuate inequality. And the thing with inequality is that then they also then perpetuate stereotypes. This is how it becomes this kind of bizarre circle where um, you see African Americans, as for an example, you say, "Oh, look how many of them are poor. Look how many of them are living in urban areas." Well, they're living in urban areas because they were segregated. Oh, okay. So it becomes this kind of like, you know, notion where, oh, this group tends to fall into this space, but maybe it's because they've done this, and don't, you know, you don't see how the system kind of created that, and then you kind of sit back and think about, well, but this is where they're at. So what am I supposed to do about that? And it becomes extremely like so difficult to grab on and think about how to fix. But 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 these notions, this basic understanding, right? Again, this is an intro class. We don't have to know all of that. In an intro class, we're talking about just getting an understanding of it. So if we talk about the issues of inequality, of race, and of gender, right? We could see how these things become extremely tense during these moments, right? We've had our over the last several years, we've had our moments where we had the movement against Wall Street very early on, where people were taking over parks and tenting it in parks. We had the Me Too movement, and now we're having the Black Lives Matter movement. It's significant that these three things have come to light within the last 5 years. And it's significant to try and get an understanding of how these things appear and why they exist, and then being able to start the process of using that sociological imagination to both understand your position within all of this. This means that whether you are a white male, white female, a person of color who's male, a person of color who's female, if you happen to be transgender, queer, if you happen to be gay, how, that part, right, exists, what it means to you, and then, of course, being able to stretch that out into the whole of society and see how it fits within the society as a whole, right? That's the sociological imagination part. Being able to go back and forth into that, see the society for what it is, see how it positions you, and see how it positions others as well, right? Once you see your position, you start to see other people's positions, and then it all starts to slowly make a little more sense. Not perfect sense, just a little more sense. So I hope that um, this is beneficial for you guys. Um, Again, pay attention to the date. If you were missing it, I can give you until, uh, here's the summer 2020, right? The last day of class is the 26th. I have to submit grades by the 3rd. That means usually 3rd, it says right there by noon. So it's always at noon. So that means I need a couple of days, typically longer, but at least a few days to be able to grade your work and then calculate your final grade and submit it. So I want to make sure that all of that gets through. Um, if you look at uh, what you guys are supposed to do, there's 2 exams and then there's the discussions, right? And the only thing I have other than that is if you go into Growing Up Online, there's a quick video that you have to watch and just kind of comment on, right? Um, Actually, it looks like I just have the video now. But if you go to cultures, right, make sure you use this values project, right? If you're looking at this, remember that I'm looking for you to basically um, submit the work as best you can, and time is up. So take care, guys.